Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 17th meeting of 2013 of the Public Audit Committee. Can I ask that all electronic devices are switched off? Item 1, apologies. We have apologies from James Dornan and Christina McKelvey, who will attend, is caught up in a significant traffic issue this morning on the way through from Glasgow, as is Ken McIntosh, so both Christina and Ken will join us later. Item 1, can we agree to take items 5 and 6 in private, and whether to consider a proposed new format for the Scottish Government's major capital project update in private at future meetings?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 2, Section 23 report. Members have before them an update from the Scottish Government on issues which had been raised in the Auditor General for Scotland's report, Commonwealth Games 2014, Progress Report 2, Planning for the Delivery of the XXth Games. I would have to say that it's very encouraging what we're reading. It's a huge undertaking, and I think all the partners have worked well together, from the Scottish Government down to the implementation team. I think the implementation team's doing a terrific job, and all credit to Glasgow City Council. They've really pulled out all the stops, and anyone who has been in and around the east end of Glasgow recently can see that the infrastructure is absolutely fantastic, that the facilities are outstanding. So I think everyone involved is to be commended, and I'm sure there will be the slight niggle here and there that you never have a major event without something like that, but I think on the whole it's been a tremendous achievement. So, any comments, thoughts? Mary?
Well, I totally agree and associate myself with the comments that you've made. It was just on the security issue, and really just asking for updates, because it seems to me, well, paragraph 34, there have been 13 private contract security companies contracted, but also in the report that we've got from the Coordination Commission, paragraph 3.9 under security, and I know that, I don't know, is it an additional 90 million was allocated to Police Scotland? It was a significant amount. Anyway, this was in the earlier days. But I just note in the second paragraph of 3.9, there is going to be a shortfall in security guarding requirements, and partners are now engaged in high-level discussions on how that can be redressed by a different workforce mix than was previously envisaged. I know there were issues regarding security at the Olympic Games in London, and I know everything has been done to ensure that we won't be facing the same problems, but it was just, convener, that seemed to me, as you would say, perhaps one of the niggles that need to be addressed. And I just wondered if we could have an update on that one. Yes,
I think it would be worth doing that. Security is clearly a very sensitive issue, and we do remember the arguments and disputes which broke out at the beginning of the Olympics. Now, thankfully, yes, it all went smoothly. Yeah. So we need to make sure that security is in place. There is always the background issue in security, which attaches to any major public project, because I do know that the police for many years have had concerns about some of the smaller, more local security companies, whether it's from the Garden of Housing Association or development building sites, right through a whole range of projects, and we would hope that the police have been able to have an influence on how the contracts are awarded. But I think this is a bigger issue than that. So yeah, okay, we could certainly maybe write and ask for some clarification and make sure that we're kept up to date on progress. Tavi Scott?
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me, can I just echo that point about security? I think the budget is 90 million. It would be helpful to have a breakdown of that, which presumably must be available on the basis that the submission was made and the government no doubt sensibly accepted that. The other point I had, because this letter to the committee wasn't dated, is that in the section on public transport enhancement plans, it mentions that we, who I presume means the Games organisers, are currently waiting for First ScotRail to submit their costed train plans to Transport Scotland due at the end of November. Well, we're now into December, so I somewhat assume that's been done, but it might be helpful for the committee to be told that's underway.
Okay, can I start? Bob Doris.
Just briefly, Mary's point on security. I see after the section that Mary quoted, it says that it should be resolved just before Christmas, so kind of imminently. It might be worth just in any letter that we write to say, could you write back to update us once this is resolved, or else we might end up sending 2 letters. You know, if we send a letter just now, they write back in January saying it'll be in 2 weeks' time, it'll be ready. If we could just time it so that we word the letter in such a way saying, we note that the issues are said to be resolved imminently. Could you write back to us as soon as they are, and with a budget breakdown as well? I think Tavish makes a reasonable point in relation to that, just so we don't have to send 2 pieces of correspondence, that's all.
Clerks will draft something appropriate. Willie Coffey.
I can see from this report we're heading for what looks to be a fantastic Games for Scotland. The issue that caught the attention of the Audit Committee in the past was, of course, progress at Hampden. And there's a comment there about Hampden and the planning application. We expect to get that by the end of this year. Just to ask, will we receive any further updates now, between now and the Commonwealth Games, about progress, or will that be it and we look forward to the Games themselves?
To be honest, I would suspect that we won't get any more progress reports. I think all the attention now needs to be on delivery. I think all the major milestones have been reached, the targets have been achieved. 1 or 2 things still to get a wee bit of clarification on, but generally, you know, I don't think there's much more for us to hear. And Audit Scotland have confirmed that they'll give a final performance report on the Games after the event.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Colin Keir.
To be honest, that was one of the issues I was bringing across, because the what they're doing at Hampden with the raising of the ground and the track and all the rest of it is part of the fact it's key to the showpiece events at the Games. I don't think, as far as I'm aware, this particular method's been used before, and to actually produce an international track of that standard in that way. And it would have been interesting if we could have got an idea just how things are progressing, if there's any problems. But
I think if we're realistic, then we need to consider what role Audit Scotland would play in that, and I don't think that's one for them. That will be for the organising committee and for the City Council and others, the SFA. So we're not a body that is kind of managing or supervising the delivery of the Games. So I think from the broader financial perspectives and management of resources, you know, we've done what we needed to do. Audit Scotland has done its role, and you know, the rest will be considered thereafter. Anyone else? Okay, so we'll seek the clarification that was requested, but other than that, note the report and wish everyone well for a successful, what I am sure will be a hugely successful Games that will put Scotland on the map. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right. Item 3, Section 23 report, Housing in Scotland. We have a response from the Scottish Government, and you will see that it's a very positive response. They've accepted and welcomed much of what's in the report, and they've given an indication of how they intend to proceed. Any thoughts or comments? Willie?
Just to say, it's one of the most detailed responses I recall from the Scottish Government. You can see of Audit Scotland's 15 out of 15 of their recommendations they've agreed with. One of them partially, but there's an explanation about the basis for that. So I think I would say I was quite pleased with the response that we've got there and the level of detail that was provided to the members for the questions that we raised.
Okay, any other?
I agree. I thought it was very thorough. Yeah.
Okay, there are a number of options open to us. We can note the response. We could refer it to the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. We could invite further written or oral evidence from the Scottish Government or relevant stakeholders, but I'm not sure that there's much to be gained from that. So, is there anything that members feel that the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee, we could note it and refer it to them for their interest?
Yes.
I think given the level of detail and information that it would be worth, particularly as the Auditor General did highlight a number of issues about definition, about the way we monitor information. I think they'd find it very useful.
To note the response and refer it to the Capital and to the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee. Okay, thank you. Item 4, managing early departures from the Scottish public sector. Committee members will have received correspondence from the Scottish Government, and there's a further letter which has come in, I think circulated to members this morning from Sir Peter Housden, indicating that he plans to consult public bodies on revised arrangements early in 2014, and that would enable new procedures to be adopted and operative for the financial year 2014-15. Any thoughts, comments? Ken McIntosh?
First of all, can I just say I think it's a very welcome letter and a very welcome change of tone from Sir Peter Housden. He starts off with an apology, and I have to say I'm delighted that he took that note rather than the previous rather abrupt and offhand and dismissive letter to the committee, which I think prompted our concern. There are a number of issues which had raised. The particular one here is about the settlement, or what he calls settlement arrangements, agreements. It's interesting how you can change a name. The Sellafield scenario, isn't it? This is clearly a huge step forward. There's been an enormous increase in the use of compromise or settlement agreements in recent years, and amounting to now, well over £50 million over the last few years. What's interesting here is that the government is actually consulting with bodies such as public corporations, which are not actually within the remit of the Auditor General. I think Scottish Water, Brain, Scottish Nels and so on, which is very welcome and quite interesting. I'm just interested from, perhaps would welcome the Auditor General's views on what that means for us, or maybe the committee clerk would advise us at some point, because clearly these are bodies which are not normally within our remit. But I think it's very important, given the public money involved, that they do consult with the government and then inform them about the use of settlement agreements. I noticed that we've had a new note this morning from Sir Peter Housden saying that they're consulting the public bodies in the early new year. What's not quite clear from the initial letter is what then happens to the information. I think it's important that they're consulted. It's important then that they're informed of the use of these agreements. What doesn't seem to be clear is whether then that information is collected in any central or collated in any central way, or whether or not it is then forwarded to us or to anybody else, or presented for public inspection. Now, it's not the job of this committee, nor for that matter of central government, to micromanage these individual decisions. But what the government should be doing, and I would have thought we would wish to monitor, is whether or not there is increased use. That's what concerned me. It was the increased use over a number of years of settlement agreements. So they were rising against a tide where we're trying to control public spending. This was something which was taking up ever greater sums of public money. So what's not clear here, and I wonder whether we should write back to Sir Peter, possibly, to coincide with when he gets responses from his consultation, to ask him what they're then going to do with this information, and whether they will gather it together centrally. I mean, what I don't want to happen is once the central government gets it, we could FOI it from the central government, but I don't think we should be obliged to do that. I think it should be somehow more transparent. So I just would like to ask him what he intends to do, whether he intends to pass it as a matter of note, straightforward, to this committee so we can keep an eye on it.
I think that's quite helpful from Ken McIntosh, and I think the tone is very positive from Sir Peter, and he did indeed apologise for not making himself sufficiently clear in earlier correspondence, and I think that's welcome that he put that on the record. In terms of gathering together, collating all this information, a note in paragraph 4, subsection C, he says, Sir Peter says that each public body should report on the use of such settlement agreements in their annual reports or otherwise as appropriate. That would be the public body, so they will have to report publicly on it. So I don't think anything will need to be FOIable, but I think Mr McIntosh does make a reasonable point in terms of collating it all together for ease of reference, and that's perhaps something we want to go back and ask the Scottish Government about. But my interpretation of Section 4C would be that the information will be publicly available without the need to FOI. I could be wrong on that, but we could always go back and get that clarified.
Mary?
Yeah. This was actually one of the issues that Bob Black, in his final meeting with this committee, said that he was quite concerned about. I don't actually remember the full extent of his concern, but I find this settlement agreements, we're talking about compromise agreements, we're talking about voluntary resignations, we're talking about standard severance, we're talking about an awful lot of things. And as I remember Bob Black, and I hope I've got him right, it was about the extent and the money that was used for these settlement agreements, but it was also, I hope I'm correct, but it is a concern that goes around, that many of these people are re-employed a few days later. I think I'm right in saying that. So it wasn't just the extent of the agreements, and I know just anecdotally from friends that, I won't say where, but an organisation that's going through a lot of change this year, that there have been significant severance agreements, and then they get a new job and a new title, so they get a huge package on the Friday and start a new job on the Monday. So I don't know if we can look into that. I don't know if it's within our remit, but I do think that it was part of Bob Black's concern that it wasn't strictly the severance agreements, it was about the re-employment a few days later.
Well, we can certainly ask the Auditor General for clarification on that point, and ask whether or not Audit Scotland is doing any more specific work on that point. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah. Okay, so other than that last point, requesting further clarification from the Auditor General, and then Ken McIntosh's point about asking Sir Peter Housden how this information will be collated and made available. Do we agree to note the response?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to item 5, and we'll move into private session.